In our previous session in Genesis chapter 20, Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, had just challenged Abraham. How could he have lied about his sister and put him at risk if he had done something to Sarah? Sarah wasn't just Abraham's sister. Sarah was Abraham's wife. So now we continue in verse 11 to 14. What Abraham answered to Abimelech when he said, "How could you do such a thing?" Abraham said, "Because, you see, I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. And yet, indeed, she is my sister. She's the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, This is thy kindness which you will show unto me. At every place where we shall come, say of me, He is my brother." And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and manservants and women servants and gave them to Abraham, and restored Sarah, his wife, back to him. Let's unpack this. What are you thinking? In response to the king's question, Abraham answered, "I thought for sure no one in this place feared God." And he would be right. "I thought someone would kill me to get Sarah." Folks, whether Abraham's assumption was well justified or not, what happened to his faith? God himself promised all of Canaan to him. Not only that, God promised him that in 9 months he'd have a baby boy. Folks, logically, how would he be able to inherit the land if he were dead? He should have known by now that God would somehow preserve him. After all, God is omnipotent. God is all-powerful. "And yet, indeed, she is my sister," was Abraham's other response. Back in Genesis 12, verses 10 to 20, we referred to this chapter as a point of reference that Abraham wasn't completely lying, but he definitely was deceitful. That's the same as a lie. Did you know that? It wasn't unusual to marry between siblings and close cousins. As a matter of fact, it was especially desirable to preserve purity, and in godly families such as Abraham's, to maintain a tradition of faithfulness to God's revelation and purposes. That's a mouthful, isn't it? It's to maintain holiness, to be set apart, so that you don't worship idols. As we also commented on and discussed after the Tower of Babel incident in chapter 11, unique individual cultures, colors, traditions, family traits, and physical appearances developed around these very close, incestuous relationships. From such we developed the idea of races. Because our water vapor canopy was gone after the flood, we became susceptible to cosmic radiation and their long-term effects. Eventually, harmful mutations had accumulated in these close communities and nations, making intermarriage an absolute necessity. By the time Moses came around, God established laws prohibiting brother and sister and first cousin marriages. But I digress from what we were talking about. We discover that both Abraham and Sarah colluded to refer to each other as brother and sister just to protect Abraham. Needless to say, because of God's intervention, Sarah was delivered from Abimelech's harem and was restored to her husband Abraham. Remember, God said, "You're not sinning just against Abraham." He told Abimelech, "You're sinning against me." That tells me there was something afoot. That tells me that she was probably already pregnant. It's not written in the Bible. We'll get to that later. So, in addition to garner favor from God's prophet, Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants and gave them to Abraham. Folks, it was completely by God's grace that both Abraham and Sarah were preserved again. God's grace